It's time for a weekly visit with State Senator Mark Messmer. Hello and welcome to WJTS Inform. I'm your host, Bill Potter. Joining me in the studio is State Senator Mark Messmer.
Great to be here.
And we've got some things to talk about and a big bill that was a big week for you that you'll wrap up with.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and
All right.
start telling us.
Super. Okay, well, so this week we did final work on 26 House bills. 24 were bipartisan and 16 unanimous. I always like to keep track of that. 14 Senate bills that had come back with changes that we did concurrences on. And all of those were bipartisan, and 9 of those had unanimous consent. So getting close to the tail end. Monday, we'll finish up second reading on bills. Tuesday, we'll finish final passage of all the House bills in the Senate, and then we go into a week and a half of what they call conference committee time. So getting near the end.
And then you'll come out and work on the budget?
The budget came out of the Senate committee yesterday.
Okay.
And we took some things out that the House did. We made some changes to the priorities. And really, I think one of the biggest things we did, we told the House, you know, we're not gonna approve a cigarette tax this year. We're not saying we'll never do it, but eventually we know the 90% that the federal government pays to cover our Medicaid expansion that we did about 4 or 5 years ago. They've told us it's 90% for up to 10 years. And it could be less. They could come next year and they could do a budget next year and say, you know, that 90% of Medicaid expansion, it's going to go to 70. And so when that happens, it's about a $500 million impact on our budget. We've been telling the House we're going to hold off on doing cigarette tax adjustments until that, because it's a big jump in revenue when you do it, at least, and we need something to offset that $500 million that we know is coming. Mm-hmm. So we took it out of the budget, which then really constrained our ability. It took about $350 million out of the budget. So then we had to make the budget balance with $350 million less dollars. Now next week we'll get our final revenue forecast, which we all anticipate to be more money. But whatever the December forecast was, that's what we have to work with. So, but we took that $350 million out. We looked at some other things the House did and reduced some things, and we have budget surpluses from prior years. We took some of that money, paid down pension debts in other funds, which freed up cash flow, in the budget. Whenever you reduce the amount of debt, and then your interest payment is less for some of the long-term pension obligations and other things we do, and capital, projects. That freed up extra money, but we were able to cut out the $350 million and still added about $300 million to education spending. So the K through 12 education, we put a lot more emphasis on the funding formula than what the House did. So all of my districts are getting more per kid, each of the next 2 years. I think I had one school district that might have had some declining enrollment. I think the second year Pike County Schools had about a 40 or 50 kid drop, and they're the ones that turn the numbers in. Mm-hmm. So with that declining enrollment, that second year, their overall funding, their overall money, gets a little tight, but they're getting a couple $100 more kid with maybe 40 or 50 less kids. So. But that looks, those numbers look good. Now we'll do another round of revisions on those when we get to the final budget work. That'll begin to next Thursday is when we get the revenue forecast. So then the last few days we'll start to then push some of that extra money that we expect to happen into maybe some of the things we cut, or even to try to even put a little bit more in the K through 12 funding formula. So that's really in a better spot than I thought we'd ever be in December. We were all looking like this budget's going to be a train wreck, but it's turned out pretty good.
Okay, I didn't mean to pull you away from
No, but that was good, because that's really the time of year we're at. So Monday we'll finish amending the budget. Tuesday will be final passage of the budget. But there won't be any additional spending things put into the budget on Monday, because it is. It's about as tight as we can squeeze it. But there's always cleanup language that will stick in the budget. And then we're on the downhill slope. From that point on, things will really start happening. Moving fast. Mm-hmm. So did have pretty good success on bills that I moved. One of the bills I talked about last week a little bit, the urban agriculture bill, had final passage, and that opens up community gardens in urban areas, which will be good for urban blight and food deserts and things that the inner city folks can take advantage of. A bill, it's really the only pro-life bill we moved this year, passed out of the Senate this week, and that has really three provisions of it. One is enhancing the rules regarding, right now they're supposed to do an ultrasound 18 hours ahead of time, let the patient see the ultrasound, but there's really, we enhance the verification steps in that to make sure they know they've seen it, they've been offered, they can get a picture of the baby, and then those components have to go in that patient's file for the State Department of Health to do audits on it. Right now there's wasn't much enforcement mechanism in there. Second part was on the abortion drugs that's where more of the abortions are happening this year. Make sure the first dose is given in the presence of a doctor, and that they explain the process, and that they are given information on abortion reversal. There's a reversal drug you can take that counteracts they do it in 2 steps, and it requires them to give them notice on what's going to happen, and that there is a reversal drug available. And then the third piece of that was requiring parental consent forms that underage girls that go in to get an abortion, right now they have to have parental signature, but they're adding a notary requirement to that, which when you go into a notary to get a form notarized, you have to have identification that says this is actually who you are, because there's a lot of folks that are maybe in the sex trafficking business that have underage kids that get pregnant, they take them in, they falsify the parental consent form, and there's about 200 minors that get abortions in the state on an annual basis, and we just want to make sure that they are indeed being authorized by their parents. So that passed out. House Bill 1002 that I was the House sponsor of, it gives some extra liability protection to hospital workers and doctors that have had to deal with COVID-19 and restrictions that were put on them through governor's executive orders. They had to stop doing elective procedures. They had to postpone appointments, and there was a lot of things that they had to do to comply with the governor's mandates, and they wanted to have liability protection, for those pauses that they had to do to non-emergency procedures. And we worked quite detailed on that with the opponents of the bill as it left the House, and made sure that it only applies when the emergency order is in place. So we made it retroactive last March. And while the governor's emergency order is in place, they get that extra liability protection. If he ever stops the emergency provisions, then those liability protections go away. Okay. And that was really one of the big stumbling blocks on that one. And then the universities wanted to have some class action lawsuit protection for when they had to go do virtual classes in the spring. And in the fall, there's some that are still doing virtual, or some hybrid versions of that. But they wanted to have protection from being sued in a class action lawsuit for that they would consider that a violation of their tuition contract. They can still be sued, by students or parents that were unhappy, but there was no objection to that, by any groups that came in to give them protection from, a group being able to pool up with a class and have the entire student body of Purdue, IU, Ball State, and we included private and public universities both in that, and that all sailed through pretty easily. And then I had 3 bills that got concurred on this week that they got changed in the House, came back to the Senate for a final vote, because if you amend even one word, you have to do another vote on it, because they have to be identical in both. One was Senate Bill 304, and that deals with what they call unlawful indemnity contracts, where they can't require an engineering company to defend a contractor on a mistake by the contractor. If there's negligence claimed against the engineer, they're liable for that. They can get coverage for that. But when you're a contractor, whether you are the contractor, a sub, or the general, you can get insurance coverage for all the parties in a construction job. When you're an engineer, you can't. And we had applied that to all public contracts 2 years ago, but the state Indiana Department of Administration decided, they didn't think it applied to them. Well, as we got close to the end, they said, yeah, it does apply to us. Can you pull that bill out? And we said, no, we're gonna make sure it's in code. But Representative Bartels, dealing with some local government issues in that same public contracts section of code, there's a contracting provision in that public section work called build, operate, and transfer. And it's typically done on fire station type projects. And there was a clarification that just did technical work within that build, operate, transfer section of code that was in the same public works section as my bill. So did that to work with Representative Bartels and got that into the bill, and then we concurred on that this week unanimously. So that one was complete. Another one was the Oliver Winery bill. I think we talked about earlier in the session. They've had tremendous growth in their bulk in their wine production, and they can bring in additional bulk wine for their production needs. And the artisan distillers wanted to have approval to work with maybe a large distillation company to bring in stuff that needs to just be packaged, maybe in an artisan distillery, let them use their packaging lines, or maybe even for vodkas or things that don't get aged, even do production for a larger distillery, utilize their equipment to help them just, use their equipment more efficiently and productively. And that passed, had a couple of no votes on people who just don't vote for alcohol bills, but that passed overwhelmingly. And then the last one, which came to me from a constituent in Boonville. And when we issued we don't actually in our statutes give the titles of the name of the person involved, but we tagged this one Christie's Law. And it came from a constituent whose daughter disappeared in Boonville in 2014, and moved through the House unanimously, got to the Senate, and the state superintendent said, I'd rather have that decision of whether to go ahead and do an investigation, because it's going to be rare. I mean, if you get a couple a year in the scenarios that happen there. But he said, I want that decision for the making the decision to investigate or not to come to my desk. So where we had state police listed generally in 5 places, we replaced that with the state police superintendent. And Doug Carter said, I'd rather have that decision. So that way we don't have a situation where maybe a local sheriff's department or local police station, didn't do an investigation rather than have the family go to the Jasper Post and have those guys who work routinely with those officers. He didn't want that decision, left at that level. He said, I'll make the decision. And then if an investigation is warranted, then, it would be done by those folks in that area. But he wanted to take some of the pressure off the local department for that. So agreed to that, passed unanimously in the House, passed unanimously in the Senate, down to the governor's office. And the family from Boonville, the dad was watching all of that, move through. And he testified in the Senate in the first half. In the second half, he couldn't be there for the day of the hearing, but he monitored on the internet, on the webcast, and watched the House and Senate work on the floors. And when it was done, he said, hey, can we call this Christie's Law? And so as we did our press releases on it, we'll do a bill signing on it, later on, kind of the ceremonial signing, and I'll invite the family to come up with the governor, and we'll do another press briefing on it at that time. But that's a big win for this family and for families in those shoes going forward.
Well, congratulations on a good week.
Yep, very good week.
We're almost going to be done.
Getting close.
What is it, next week? And
we'll wrap up on the 22nd.
Okay, so almost done.
Yeah, it'll be the wee hours of the morning on the 22nd.
But it will be the 22nd.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Senator, for coming in.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Our guest has been State Senator Mark Messmer. Thank you for watching 18 WJTS. We are local people watching local people.